Staying with the fall camp theme, we're just about halfway through, or a little bit more at this point, with only 2 weeks left. So, what have you picked up from the intel that is leaked out from Norman?
So Oklahoma's had two major scrimmages at this point, Mark. I think probably stands to reason they'll have probably one more before they get into game prep and things like that. And so I think so at this point, defense has won the day. I think there's a and you have a little bit so folks that support Oklahoma and watch Oklahoma through the years, it's well chronicled Oklahoma where Oklahoma's been from a defensive perspective. Right, but I think when you look at what this team has coming back, who they've been able to add, and just what's happened on the coaching side of things, and even bringing Zach Alley in, I think there's a belief within kind of within that room, and even not only locally but nationally that this is going to be a much improved defense. And I think a lot of people are thinking this has the makings of being a top 15, top 20 defense. I think for me, as I kind of look through that, it's more of a let's see it type of thing. I think they've got the talent there. I mentioned Zach Alley. It looks like a lot of the kids are really taking to him, and this is not to impugn anything that BV has been able to do with certainly, but he's got to be the head coach and he can't be in the weeds and stuff. So I think they've done a good job at simplifying the defense a bit from all points that I've seen. So I think it's allowed some of these kids to play a little bit more free, not be out there thinking as much and just playing the game of football. And so I think you've seen that a little bit early on, really at all levels of the defense. Um, I think for me, one thing that's really positive to see is the middle of the interior of the defensive line has been very, very solid. Running room um, has been lacking, or at least in the middle between the tackles, and so I think that's something that you like to see if you're Oklahoma, specifically based on the fact that who Oklahoma has lost from that defensive line last year and what they have to replace. But um, Dominic Williams, Dejon Terry, Grayson Halton, those are guys that have been really, really solid. Grayson Halton was a guy that from what I had heard was constantly been in the backfield. Um, and then Caden Woolard is another guy from a defensive end perspective that I keep hearing, some good things about. So much so that I think that he's a very intense guy. Played really well last year. Of course, coming over here, but really, really intense guy, and they've had to tell him to, kind of chill out a little bit in terms of, getting after the quarterback and practice and things like that. So I think defense has been I think the last scrimmage, the offense played a little bit better, was able to make some plays. I think, um, which I think the question that's being asked right now, I think that's being discussed is the is the defensive line much improved or is the offensive line struggling? And there's no clear answer on that, right? I think you'll probably get more of a clear answer. Probably not even game one. Probably not until Tennessee. Maybe Tulane and Houston to a certain degree, right? But really not until they play Tennessee. And so I think that'll be like a work in progress. And so I think I mean, you have to assume it's a little bit of both, right? I mean, they've, there's a lot of new faces to that offensive line. There's been a little bit of injuries that have come across. And so I think that's one thing. The other thing to consider here, I think, scrimmage number one, Jackson Arnold wasn't great. Turned the ball over really a little bit, but I think that was more about from everything I've heard. Just didn't have time. You know, anytime he dropped back, didn't have time to survey the field. Was making incredibly quick decisions, and and turned the ball over a little bit. Had a I think from what I understand, three turnovers, one fumble, and a couple of interceptions. And of course, you one of the fumbles was a botched handoff with him and the running back. One of the interceptions was a tip ball from the defensive line. And so some of those things are, maybe not necessarily within his control, but again, it's very well chronicled that the bar at that position at the University of Oklahoma is raised exponentially. And so I think Mark, you're going to see a situation this year. I mean, and you have to expect it to a certain degree. There's very few I mean, not true freshmen, but freshmen, sophomores, sophomores coming into their second year that haven't had a lot of playing time. They're going to have some mistakes, right? They're going to have these games where they look fantastic and they're great, but then they're going to have these games where it just doesn't look great. It's a little weird. There's some weird reads. There's some questionable decision making and things like that happens, and there's some turnovers that are going to happen. So you just have to trust and hope that the good, you see more good than bad. So the positive note is, sounds like in the second scrimmage it was much better, less turnovers. I had a little bit more time to survey the field, made some good downfield throws and some big plays to. Looks like Dion Burks really made a lot of plays, which I think he's going to be the guy that's one of his go-to guys, at least early on, until the rest of those guys are 100% healthy. So a little bit of back and forth is what you would assume. I mean, I think I mean, at this level, you expect the defense to be a little bit ahead of the offense early on, and especially if the defense is going to be the strength of the team, you would expect that to happen, especially with some youth on the offensive side of the ball, as well as just getting that offensive line together. And I don't think it's one of those things, Mark, where you can say this is going to be a really good offensive line or it's going to be a really bad offensive line. I think it's a work in progress type of thing, where I think the benefit of the schedule will be that as such as they'll have the ability to kind of move some players around, play with some different lineups early on. Um, Particularly Temple, as I've kind of looked at Temple, I guess I didn't realize how bad of a football team they've been over the last few years. And then I don't know. I mean, I know that we've talked about this as well from time to time. We're both of us are very, interested in betting lines and stuff like that, and we play around with that. But I think it's around 42 is the line. And that my eyes, like, got big when I said, "42, is Temple really?" And so I looked, and I was like, "Yeah, they've won, I think, 3 games each of the last 3 years." So
Yep.
it's not a great team, but I say that to say, and I think the best thing about this schedule, we talked about schedule all summer here, Mark, but I think it's good that it progressively gets better. I think each week when you look at those first four weeks, you go with Temple, then Houston's a little bit better, Tulane's probably a little bit better than Houston, and then you've got Tennessee. So it gives them a little bit of opportunity to shore up that offensive line and get it to the point where they'd like it to be with the Tennessee game.
So I'm looking at Temple's last 5 years of results. And again, as you mentioned, 3-9 the past 3 seasons playing in the American Conference. So when they have had to play a power conference opponent, last year they went to Rutgers, they lost by 29. They played Miami, they lost by 34. They played SMU, which is now a power conference team. They lost by 55. The year before in 2022, they lost to Duke by 30. They lost to Rutgers by 2. They lost to UCF by 57. They lost to Houston by 7. They stayed in the game there. They lost to Cincinnati by 20. A year before in 2021, they lost to Rutgers by 45. They lost to Boston College by 25. And let's see some other games against those type of opponents. Going back to 2019, they actually were an 8-5 football team, and they beat Maryland by 3. And they beat Georgia Tech by 22 that particular year. But here in the last 4 seasons, they have taken a beating by an average, I don't know, 30 or 35 points a game.
Yeah, I was just looking at the same thing. Looks like, Mart last year their only wins were against, well, two of their three wins were against Akron, Norfolk State, but they did beat Navy, which is, not not a terrible but not a terrible team. But yeah, you're right. Like I didn't um within the previous year their wins were against Lafayette, UMass, and they did have a really nice win against USF. But still, yeah, I'm with you. It was one of those things where they've struggled. Um, they struggled against these big time opponents for sure.
Akron was one of the worst teams in college football
Hmm.
last year. They beat them by a field goal.
Hmm.
Akron went 2-10, and one of their wins was against Kent, who was the worst team in
Yeah.
America, and their other win was against an FCS team. And yeah, that UCF or USF win 2 years ago sounds impressive because they have been a good team in the past and were pretty
Hmm.
good last year at 7-6. But that particular USF team went 1-11,
Yeah.
and UMass has just been ridiculously bad. So, yeah, Oklahoma's going to, regardless of whether the score is 55-3 or it's 42-10, I don't think it much matters. It's more about them working on things. And, now if the score is 17-14 in the third quarter,
Hmm.
that's going to cause some alarms. But other than that, I don't think that the score means much of anything other than those people that put a dime or two,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, on that 42-point spread.